It is Friday, August 11th, 2017, and this is the first episode of something new we're doing here with the RebelLUG, the RebelLUG Roundtable. It's basically just a generic podcast, so I'm not going to spend a bunch of time explaining it. But our three main hosts are myself, Spencer, Danny,
Hey there,
and Everett.
Hey, and we're also joined by a friend of mine from Flickr who has participated in the Bastogne collab at Brick Fair. Elliot, you want to talk about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So I'm a Lego builder. I'm mostly active on Flickr these days, but I do have a YouTube at Legoguy830, or if you want to follow me on Flickr, it's at Elliot A.
All right, so kind of our big thing this episode at least is collaborations, real collaborations. So what we really saw in the last weekend, there were two conventions that happened: Bricks by the Bay, which I was at, which wasn't as notable as Brick Fair, which you were at, where you worked on the Bastogne collab, which seemed to work out really well, especially coming from RebelLUG, who has from many perspectives had a few collabs that didn't work out as well. So could you give us some context to that, I guess, and then we'll get into our regular topics.
For sure. So every year I go to Brick Fair. It's kind of an annual thing. I always like to work on these big collabs, which if anyone in the audience isn't sure what that is, it's basically a big collaborative effort where you have a big kind of map of what you want to build, and everyone sort of build certain chunks of that display, and then when you get to the convention, you sort of put it all together like a puzzle of sorts. So the collab that I was a part of this year was Bastogne 1944, because I primarily build Lego World War II. That's kind of like my big thing, and so me and some other people on Flickr, we all kind of came together and thought this would be a good display. And I guess we'll get into that a bit more later, but just a bit of context of the display. Siege of Bastogne was a battle in World War II in 1944. It was a German surprise attack in the Ardennes region of Belgium, which I don't want to give a history lesson here, but just to kind of tell you what it was, I guess.
Yeah, I'm really excited to leech off all the information and all the knowledge you have about organizing collabs. But
sure.
Before that, we're going to talk about our favorite builds from the week.
All right.
Because there's some pretty sick ones.
So my favorite build was easily Toby's slum thing, and it's this wonderful build with this freeform kind of base plate, and it's got all these colors in the buildings and so many little details. And my favorite part about it is in the back there's a little section with a stairway going up into one of the main buildings. And another one thing I do dislike is the use of the color red on the dark red building. I just don't think it fits there very well. But that's just about it. The rest of it's really good. A lot of good, just once again, a lot of good colors there, details, and just a really unique build.
See, I don't know how I feel about the red, because I think it really makes it stand out, especially being at the top. Right. But I don't know what would have been a better substitute than the Lego.
Yeah.
The Lego red is so saturated and really gross.
I thought. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if it might work here. I don't.
I was just gonna say, I thought it was kind of interesting how it used those classic Lego windows. You don't really see those used that often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like the border around it. You don't often see builds on base plates or just plates where I like how he does the snot around it, and as it grows up, as it goes along the side there. I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice way to round off a build, or just to make it look.
Yeah,
a great touch. I love it.
I think colors for on the dark red building, the black would have been a better choice for the fences, if that makes any sense. But
yeah, I see what you're saying.
All right, and then
wait, hold on. I gotta point out some of the grass is sloped. The plates are sloped.
Yeah, it's so good.
That's fantastic.
It's the net technique, I think.
Well, those look like pretty big plates, so you could really just do it with hinges, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if he has breakdown pictures of that.
I don't know.
Nah, I don't think so. That'd be really cool to see. Our next one, Danny.
So my favorite build from this week was the Infantry Barracks Port Woodhouse. Now, this is a really simple build, not too many fancy techniques going on here, but I really like the detail and how it comes together. It's just a lot of nostalgia for me. I grew up playing with those classic pirate sets, and this just really brings that back for me.
Yeah, no, I like it too.
Yeah, I'm really feeling it.
Yeah, it's that builder. What's his name? Ari Lego. He's one of my favorites on Flickr. His colonial stuff is always just so good.
I think the simple style really, you were saying, is very reminiscent. Can't talk. Reminiscent of that classic Lego aesthetic, which looks nice.
Yep.
One thing I just noticed is he purposefully used like faded and really old white bricks to get a cool texture in there. That's something you see kind of often, but not everyone does it really right. Really liking it. But you mentioned something about simple techniques. This is something that like sometimes I struggle with, where I wonder if I'm overcomplicating it on purpose just to make it look cooler, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if sometimes it is better to just, because he's got like some angled roofs in here, but most of it's just like, you know, building bricks on top of each other with some cool texturing. So
yeah, it all works though. He's like the master of texture. Like like if you look for his stream, he's got some impressive builds on there, but they all keep this like almost Lego like just look and feel like it would be a set, if you know what I mean.
Definitely
something to analyze if you're interested in learning more about. The next build is my favorite build from the week, which when I was looking for builds of the week, this had come out like seconds before, and it really caught my eye because it has just like, probably the purpose of this was to catch my eye, but it has like some really good color combinations in it that just give it such a really nice look. The terrain isn't just like a regular green. He's got lime green and olive green mixed together and nothing really else. And the dark blue water, I don't think I've ever really seen that before. It definitely gives a much different and I think almost nicer look than, you know, just like stud pouring.
Yeah, his simple technique for the water is what really pops out. Like it's nothing. It's not even it's not even stud technique. It's just straight like plates for the water.
Yeah, I think this is a great example of what Spencer was talking about earlier, where it's so easy to try to go with a complex technique just to make something look good, where here's just simple putting bricks down and it looks phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. I think another thing too is you guys were kind of hitting on it earlier, but the colors just contrast so well with each other. With the lime and olive green on the light gray looks really well, and then the dark blue just really pops. It catches your eye.
See, I wonder how much this was like thought out. Like, is he looking into the fundamentals of just like what catches your eye to get good color combinations?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's something that I would like to really improve on, is just those really basics but often overlooked elements of just making things like Lego, which is kind of just, you know, its own art. So
yeah, color is the big key for that kind of stuff.
I mean, oh sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say generally when it comes to greens and grasses, like olive green and lime green is like a really good way of portraying like an island, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just going to say they're kind of underused colors, because usually when you're thinking grass, you usually just use those like grass stock pieces and just a traditional green. But it's really nice to see a build like mix those lesser known or lesser used greens together like that. It really looks good.
Yeah. Elliot, what was your favorite build?
Okay, so my favorite build of the week was from a guy on Flickr named Modern Bricks, and he did a Chinook helicopter in a 1/45th scale, which is pretty unique. I've never seen that helicopter in a Lego rendition at that scale. And if you're wondering what 1/45th scale is, it's the scale of a minifigure to the actual vehicle itself. I guess commonly you would see most military builds are in 1/35th or 1/40th if it's minifigure scale. Because 1/45th, it's not as popular, and especially not in modern. So I think it was just a really good build with a lot of very, very cool techniques and just a lot of high detail put in it.
I'm trying to understand. He has this little breakdown at like the top, and I'm trying to understand what's going on here. Why he has pneumatic hoses like clipped.
Yeah, so I think it's just crazy because it's like extra detail that you would not even see. It just shows like the extra effort. That's all just like the interior or internal like wiring and stuff.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That's pretty cool. I thought it was like I almost thought it was
Yeah.
like structures in some radical way, but
Yeah, he's easily one of the most underrated builders on Flickr.
Definitely deserves more attention in my opinion.
Yeah, as you were mentioning with the scale, it's just a true testament to the skill of the builder to take on a real life vehicle in that scale. I know personally, I've never attempted to build something to scale of minifigs, and it's such a challenge.
Yeah, from building with 145th, I've like dabbled in it. Nowhere near as good as this guy, but it's really challenging because the smaller scale you get, you start coming up with all these like really wacky and finicky illegal connections to get stuff to work because you just have less space to work with. So it's definitely fun, but it's very challenging.
yeah, my only thing about it, I wish that there's these round windows along the side. I wish he could have gotten rid of the gap because he used those pins with the studs on them.
Yeah.
I don't know how complicated the Lego math is there to get rid of that gap, but I think that could have really polished it off.
Yeah, he could have done it where it's just like held in place by friction, but I think that would have made the vehicle like nearly impossible to move.
Yeah, they're already so fragile in 1/5 scale. It might have just been a structural thing.
Yeah. So,
but I see what you're saying for sure.
And the sloping is also really good. Like it flows well. So going on to the next topic, and that's just news from the week.
Yeah, so since the main theme of this episode is conventions, we thought something interesting to bring up would be the decrease we've seen in attendance across the board at all Lego conventions. This is speaking for like Lego conventions like World Brick Fair, not Brickfest Live, that sort of thing. So we're just talking about the main conventions here. And really saw this, we saw a lot of conventions peak in 2014. That's when Brick Fair Virginia had about 22,000 guests. And just through last year and the past few years, we've seen a decrease, and we're trying to get to the bottom of what is causing this lack of public.
Yeah, this is in no way to be like any sort of shot or anything towards these Lego conventions, because we love these Lego conventions, and we're really like, I'm at least almost disappointed in people for not going to them.
Yes.
Because you heard Danny mention Brickfest Live, and I suppose we can just get right into that and their attendance and their ticket prices, especially in comparison to Lego convention. So I've been to one Brickfest Live. They invited my lug. I went to the one in Pasadena, and they had an exceptional amount of guests on both weekend days. And the tickets were like absurd prices. I think they were at least $20. I think they were $30. And like there was nothing really there. Like realistically, there were a few mocks, which maybe isn't really what people want, I guess. And then there were just like a bunch of games, but the games kind of sucked, and the rest was just like vendors.
Yeah, so I think. Oh,
I'm finished.
All right. Okay, so I think the issue of these Lego conventions is people are kind of like they're charging a good amount for the prices, and people are just kind of families are going there, and I mean these are yearly thing, and families will go there once, they'll see all the cool mocks, and then there's just a bunch of vendors and there's a bunch of old guys. This isn't really a shot at anyone, but it's just like I think after your first year you're gonna see the family who thinks they've seen it all, right? And maybe the kid's not interested in Lego next year or something, and maybe next year there isn't as many builds or anything, and it's like you go in there and it's really crowded and all that stuff, and it's just looking at the Lego builds, and that's fine. But I could see basically what happens since they're all in the same area is you have this, you've got most of the families, as in 2014, Lego Movie came out, most of the families that would have gone all went, and then the numbers are dropping as no one really goes yearly, right?
Yeah, another thing I was thinking too, there's so many more Lego conventions now than there used to be. I mean, even looking back like 5 or 6 years, there was basically just BrickCon, Brick World, and Brick Fair. But now, in this current time, there's like so many. There's like Brick Fair New Jersey, Brick Fair Alabama, Brick Fiesta, Brick Cascade. And I think that what it's kind of done is just kind of spread out the people, because now instead of traveling like 3 hours to go to a Brick Fair, let's say if you live in New Jersey, it's like, oh, well, Brick Fair Virginia, that is. It's like, well, we already have a Lego convention here. So I mean, I don't have the like numbers to back this up. It's more just a hunch, but I think that might be contributing to the problem we're seeing where the attendance is down.
Yeah, we can't really find attendance numbers for conventions online.
Yeah, they posted general ideas to their Twitter page. We got 22,000 Brick Fair 2014, and then I think like 16,000 last year, and then
last year at Brick Fair was 15,000,
right,
and this year was about 10,000. I know from
Mhm.
Brick World Chicago, last year's Brick World was 16,000 because I remember it was bigger than Brick Fair, and then this year it was 8,000. So literally half the amount of people attended or showed up on public day this year. So,
Now, do you guys think this is just a downward trend in general, or do you think it's just kind of like anomaly and it will like rebound?
well, I think
shortly?
Everett had mentioned that the Lego movie came out in 2014. I think that's a big reason for that spike that we saw, the setting records across the board there. And I think that was a big thing that brought a lot of people back to Lego, like parents remembering their childhood. We saw the trailers and stuff, brought their kids to see it. Yeah, we had the Lego Batman movie this past year, but it was nowhere near the success that the first Lego movie was. So I think that is partially responsible for the decline.
Well, like I mentioned Brickfest Live, and they're increasing attendance, and they have much different advertising strategies than these Lego conventions do. Like I get Groupon ads for Brickfest Live, and I have like no affiliation with Lego or anything on there. So I wonder if people attend that, and then it's like because they've spread out. They have like 30 some events, I think, around the country, and they're just doing them all the time. So they've kind of conquered like all these different territories that conventions have previously occupied. It's definitely been something that's happening now for a long time, and it doesn't seem like any conventions are doing something about it. They're probably trying, but nothing's really working.
Yeah. So like conventions basically are, as I said, there isn't really a lot of like innovation there for each con, right? Like each con, like they're all great, but they're all really just the same thing, and it's the same thing every year, and that's probably what's really hurting them. And there's also
go ahead.
There's also just been a general decrease in like builds, and I think we were talking about this earlier, but it was basically we go from Brick Fair 2014 to having Carentan, Crete, Homefront, RebelLUG's collab with Cyberpunk, Gary's Battle of the Forest collab, and all that stuff. To this year, we have got Bastogne, Nassau, and that was just about it.
That's basically it, yeah.
See, I would disagree with that though, because although that is true, like the public doesn't know what builds are going to be there. So I don't think you can say the lack of collabs or builds going.
Well, that's more just
is responsible for, because like I know with Brick World Chicago, although we've seen a decrease in the public, we've seen an increase in people displaying every year.
That's interesting because I know at Brick Fair, I think it's a decrease all around because noticeably there was less builds, I felt like, this year, and a lot more vendors, which is something also to consider. There's definitely some collabs that are way more like vendor popular, if that makes sense. I know this is just from secondhand experience, but I have friends who've gone to Brickfest Philly, and they basically have told me where it's just like, yeah, there's basically no builds. It's all just vendors. And, you know, vendors are cool and all, but unless you're really into Lego, I don't think you're going to be really going out of your way to go to a convention where you're just going to be able to buy stuff. You know, a lot of people go to these things just because they want to see cool builds.
Right. And I think the public decrease might have been like, you got one film and it goes in 2014, sees all the collabs, and goes again in 2015, and there isn't really anything there. And so they just don't go again.
That's an interesting point.
Sometimes I do wonder, like, if they really are there to see cool builds, or like most of them, because I think people that bring their kids are like, they're just gonna go. It's a Lego related thing, but everyone else, or a majority of everyone else, I think them are like collectors, you know. So they're looking to buy and pick up new stuff. They aren't like, builds are cool and all, but I'm really here for minifigs and sets.
I think what it really comes down to is the demographics of people going to Brick Fair, where you have sort of just casuals who are just kind of like going there like, oh, cool, this is neat. And then you have Lego fans going there who are probably then more into the buying and collecting stuff in addition to the builds themselves.
Yeah, I can definitely see vendors being a big part of it. I mean, there's the more vendors there are, the less public will be there. And I mean, because they'll just remember it as expensive. And then the more vendors are, the more like Lego related people there will be.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we don't have these numbers offhand, but it'd be very interesting to kind of see of the public going, how many of those people are actually like would consider themselves to be like Lego fans, or how many are they just like family members who are just kind of there for the ride? Because I think that'd be definitely interesting. Because if you're right with your hypothesis of the Lego movie being a big draw, maybe that just brought in a lot of kind of like casual fans who were just kind of like reminiscing on nostalgia, and that's maybe they're just going to Brick Fair or these conventions for like a one-time thing, kind of like you were saying.
Yeah, we got to get a survey out there at a convention and see what's going on, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Come on,
Definitely
help us out.
Yeah, what?
Go on, Everett.
No, I was gonna just point out that the decrease in conventions might just get really bad in a few years, and we might see a disappearance of a few.
I think definitely. I think it got it like peaked in 2014 and around then, and that's kind of like I think that the peak of where you have like so many conventions. But if this downward trend continues, I think definitely we might see more conventions kind of folding. I know Brick Fair New England, I don't think happens anymore, but we come too. It could just rebound. I guess there's no real way of knowing for sure, so it's kind of just a wait and see thing. But one thing I was going to ask. In general, do you guys have any ideas on how, like, let's say hypothetically you were running one of these conventions, how you might, what would you do to improve attendance in the future?
Something interesting that kind of Spencer touched on before was how they market it basically to the public with the advertising. I know this year after Brickworld Chicago, some RebelLUG members had gone and visited Brickloot, and they actually said in 2016 Brickworld, there was an option when buying tickets to actually buy a ticket that included a Brickloot box that was a bit more expensive. And the Brickloot people think that was another reason that there was a decrease because they didn't do that this year. So it could, like Spencer was touching on earlier, be a whole marketing thing.
Yeah, and I don't know about that Brickloot one though. But I do agree that adopting new marketing strategies is really important. Obviously, that's important for everything. That's kind of like given, but really taking it seriously, because at Bricks by the Bay, the first year I went, they had like 10,000 people, and it basically cut itself in half for the following like couple of years, which was really bad. It was down to like 2,500 people one year. So like if that kept happening, it wasn't going to happen again.
It rebounded though.
Yeah, they hired somebody that was just for advertising. And that's what they did for the convention, because now Bricks by the Bay is like an actual company and not just like a dude and some other people running it. So I don't know. I'm sure Brickworld has a much more elaborate Brickworld and these other conventions have much more elaborate experience about this than we do. But I do like thinking about it though.
I think another like interesting case study of marketing could also be looking at the Brick Mania conventions, more Brick ones, because they at one point it felt like they had like 5 bricks going on at the same time. I don't know if they're doing them anymore.
I think they canceled them for other reasons.
Yeah, I mean,
there's a story behind that, but
there was a split between.
I don't think we need to go into that in this episode.
That was really what killed it. Anyway, so we want to move on to the next.
Yeah, well, just to wrap this up on an optimistic note, because we've been talking about failing conventions for the past bunch of minutes or so. There does seem to be hope in the future. Like, I know Brickworld Chicago isn't just giving up; they're opening a few more Brickworlds. They mentioned the next year they're gonna have a Brickworld Michigan in addition to all the others like Brickworld Indy, Brickworld Chicago, all that. So they're still expanding. They're not just stopping, and so optimistic there.
So anyway, what I was saying earlier before I had some mic use, but I don't know if at this point there's enough observable data to show that this downward trend is going to continue going, or if it's just going to be kind of like an anomaly and it will go back up again. Because before these past couple of years, at least as far as Brick Fair goes, and I know BrickCon, which is another convention I've been to, which is also suffering some of the same problems, but that's besides the point. But the attendance was pretty stable, so we'll just have to wait and see.
Right. So transitioning into our next topic, which is just the best builds we saw at Brick Fair. And
all right. So who wants to talk about this first one? This is the ThugLUG display. Their collaborative build. I'm going to give this off to Everett to talk about first.
All right. I'm sure Elliot will also want to talk about it.
You want to give some background real quick about what ThugLUG is?
Elliot, you can talk about that.
ThugLUG? Yeah, so for the audience here that might not be familiar with ThugLug, they're basically a group of builders, and it's kind of like this sort of like secretive Lego love that they kind of don't do anything on Flickr, but every year they just pump out these spectacular builds, usually in the vein of World War II or other various historical events. And I think big highlight of the Collab is the landscaping is super nice. And then one of the things that collabs often have problems with is because there's so many people building and helping for them. Oftentimes collabs kind of feel like jobbled and kind of cobbled together, where you can tell that this was built by different people. But ThugLug in their displays, especially, it looks like it was all built by one person. It just all flows so nicely together because they're just really like tight knit and kind of understand each other.
Yeah. So from my knowledge, ThugLug they will get together and assemble the entire build at a house outside the Brick Fair before going. And that's how
I think Brian Carter, one of the members, lives pretty close to
so they basically just right. So they basically just assemble it there, and then they'll move on to Brick Fair, and then by that point, it's going to look all together. And so the big thing of this one, it's the Nassau Republic of Pirates from 1715, which was a time where a bunch of pirates took over the island of Nassau along the Bahamas. So basically, it's just a little featurette. It's got like an old fort, and the big key is the landscaping. And it goes from one of my favorite techniques in the build is this the beach, where it's like they go from using snot to plates really well to represent like the shoreline and all that stuff with the tide going in.
Definitely.
And it just looks great. And then the rock work, and then I love the little brown paths like run through the build too.
I think one of the highlights too that you didn't mention was the fort. The builder who built that, Ryan Keith or Ryan K on Flickr, he did a tremendous job on that. Like the angles and stuff on that are really cool. Yeah,
and then you have that flipper technique on the roof.
That was very clever.
And they're generally just ThugLug's basically been doing this landscaping deal for just so long that they're able to get it down to like a science.
I mean, if your audience here wants to kind of like look at it, just if you find pictures of all their collabs, that's definitely like the thing that you probably notice throughout, no matter what era or genre they're doing. It's just the landscaping is so good.
Do we talk about the net
net
terrain
technique.
Oh man, I love that so much.
Oh yeah, that's I can explain that too, because if your audience isn't familiar, if you want.
Yeah, because I have a picture of it here, right? And it just looks like such an organic way to do Lego, because it just looks alien to like what Lego.
Yeah, it looks like seamless kind of. But yeah, that's definitely a cool technique. It's just super innovative. It's been used a lot. It's not really a new technique. It's been around a while. A lot of people have used it for like water and capes. I've seen it used for like life-size capes. But recently, as of like a couple years ago, and really especially ThugLug kind of pioneered it. It's just been using it for landscaping, so you get these nice sort of natural hills. And do you have a picture of how they did it with the nets and stuff on the screen? I can actually see.
But generally, I've done it before. At least the way I understand to do it is, you just take a net, and then on one side of the net, you put what you want on top, and then the other side, you put like. I use those. I saw people using those 2x2 round inverted like dome tiles. Those seem to work well. But you could probably really use anything. You
can get really creative with it.
So.
Yeah, it's generally just a good technique.
And then sorry, go ahead.
No, never mind. I'm done.
I was to say one thing we should talk about too before we move on to the next collab was definitely Eric's pirate ships.
Right.
He's a guy on Flickr too, good friend. He does gorgeous tanks, but lately he's been building pirate ships, and this collab especially, he really showcased them, and they're just so gorgeous. It's he doesn't use like the big Lego pirate ship pieces. He actually does his own hull with just like bricks and stuff. It just looks so natural and good. I really encourage you guys to definitely check out.
Here, I'm gonna link one of their collabs from 2014. Looking at just for the viewers' purpose to see.
The Carrington one? Yeah, that's what
Carrington.
we were talking about earlier when we were briefly talking about 2014. Carrington was another.
Carrington was my favorite collab from that year, easily.
Mm-hmm.
The buildings are so good. Anyways, so on to the next thing, and that's I think I linked Max's plane. We can talk about this for a second, but I feel like it deserved to mention just because of how good it is, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And basically, my favorite part of this plane is when Max added those. He added with the string, right? So he's got the little string, like suspension area going throughout the plane's wings, and that's just so well done. And Max is really good at using all the little pieces to create something and going with the really abstract techniques for really anything he builds, and it always works out well. And very well deserved best aircraft win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say with those abstract techniques you were talking about, just the simple things like if you look at those wheels, he took those bicycle tires and just built a really cool apparatus from various pieces around it. Like such a simple thing. You could have just thrown like a wheel piece there, but instead he went the extra mile and did all that.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I was just going to say like Max has really kind of pioneered this new genre of 145th World War I planes. No one was really doing this. Kind of just like comes out of nowhere with this. I don't actually remember the exact name of the plane. It's just so incredible. So many ingenious techniques and just it's gorgeous to look at.
Right. Yeah, Max and generally just do a good job with any vehicle he builds, and that's always it's just so to see.
From firsthand experience, I was actually inspired by Max to build my own Fokker, which is the Red Baron plane, the like iconic one, the tri-wing, and just it's in a similar vein of that scale, but it's just like was definitely probably the most technical build I've ever done. I mean, if you want, there's a picture on my Flickr if you want to show it, but it's just like the connections you have to kind of think of are so crazy. There's so much like flex tubing and hands and pneumatic tubing, so many illegal connections. It's like it's a really big challenge, but it's so rewarding when you kind of like get it all done, you know.
Here, I just linked a photo of it for you, Spencer.
Oh yeah, I'm seeing it. This is cool.
Yeah, it's just planes and vehicles are always just the best when it comes to techniques. So moving on to the big topic, that is Bastogne. And
yeah, so why don't we start off, Elliot, with you kind of walking through how the whole planning, like where the idea for this came from, and then the whole planning phase from there.
Definitely. So there's this guy on Flickr named, well, I guess I'll just back at BrickFair 2016. We'll rewind a bit. So at BrickFair 2016, me and a group of probably like 10 other people, we all put on a display for the Battle of St. Mare, or just St. Mare Église. That was basically a D-Day paratrooper landing. So not the beaches, but they dropped the paratroopers in behind enemy lines. And anyway, but besides the point, so that was a big success. And the next year for BrickFair 2019, we wanted to do something, but that group of guys kind of like some people like Toby wanted to go off and do APOC, and then Brendan, the other guy who was a big contributor, couldn't come to BrickFair again because it was too expensive. So we kind of had like 5 or 6 guys left from the group that wanted to do something again, but we weren't really sure what to do, and I didn't have the time to kind of run a whole collab by myself. So what happening is there was this other guy named Ethan Johnson on Flickr. His name's EK Johnson 1, and he did his own big display at BrickFair 2016. But he was gonna do his own Bastogne display at BrickFair 2017, and just like solo again. But he actually came to me and said like, "Hey, do you want to help me with this?" And I kind of just said, "Well, would you care if I had like all these other guys help too, because they all want to do a collab, but they don't really to do." And so that was kind of the inception point, and that was probably in like March, I would want to say, something like that. So it was kind of late, but Ethan had already started building the display anyway, because it was going to be a solo one in the first place. It didn't really factor in too much. So from that point, Ethan actually expanded the display, and I mean, you can see pictures of this thing. Like It's honestly like 20 feet long. It's by far the biggest display I've ever been a part of. And but as far as this planning goes, Ethan had a map. Anyone who wants to do a collab, that's very important. You need to have a very clear, concise map that effectively shows like what the build is going to look like hypothetically done, and kind of just what needs to be built. And another thing too, and feel free to chime in if you have any questions or want to say anything, but communication is key when you're doing a collab. So for this collab specifically, we Flickr group, and we had a Skype group. We primarily used the Skype group just to do like group calls, and just so kind of like get direct feedback for how to improve other people's stuff in the display, and just kind of make sure we're all on the same page. Because as I was saying earlier for about this thing is a big part of collabs is just making everything like seem natural, because you don't want a bunch of stuff like seeming out of place. Like you want it to all look cohesive. You guys have anything to say? Or I could keep.
So with that communication you were talking about, and like checking up, was there ever any problems with someone not building their parts, or like as everyone else was sending progress photos, like, was there someone who wasn't? Like, what was the driving force behind people keeping their motivation to keep building?
Yeah, so that's definitely a problem, especially when you're doing a collab of this size with so many people. Not doing their stuff. And I think part of it is just in general, you kind of just need to get on people, and you kind of just need to gauge their interest. Like if they're sort of like falling off or losing interest, you just kind of need to be prepared that that person might flake out. And that actually did happen with a few people where they were initially committed, and they had said like, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this. But then as time progressed, they lost interest, or things came up and they couldn't actually come to Brick Fair. So it's just something that is probably going to happen no matter what, and you just kind of have to be prepared for it. And part of the reason like so many collabs fail too is like you make a collab and it's like everyone's on board for the first like month, and it's like, oh damn, this is gonna be so cool, yada yada yada. But it's really important just to keeping engagement in the group and making sure like everyone's in on it and like is gonna build their stuff, because that's just so key for it to work successfully.
Now, was there any sponsorship or anything? Did any company sponsor this, give you figs, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so there's a company called the Minifig Company, formerly known as MRU, Minifigs Are Us, and they actually helped by I guess they didn't sponsor because Ethan actually purchased them, but he purchased like 100 custom snow legs. And so I should just preface by say like the majority, I would say probably half the collab was actually built by one guy, and that was Ethan. Like he runs his own Lego store, so he has a great access to parts and monetary resources, because like he makes bank. But
Yeah.
so he bought a bunch of stuff from MRU, which was kind of sponsored. I think he gave him like an account. And then I know X39 Brick Customs, Peyton, I think he might have thrown in a few things here and there, but largely wasn't sponsored, as Will, the main guy who used to sponsor a bunch of collabs, is some of your audience remember a lot of the old collabs were all really sponsored by Brick Arms, but he kind of stopped doing that. So most these days the collab is just kind of done through passion. It's not really about the sponsorships per se.
Right. I think we had a big thing I noticed was all the figures have MMCB capes. Did you guys make a big order for that, or was it just everyone's collection?
Yeah, so funny enough, a couple people like Chet and I, Chet and Bricks of War on Flickr, he had and I had capes left over from another collab way back in 2013, which was the Battle of St. Vith, which was another it was the same theater. Right. It was actually also in the Battle of the Bulge, different battle, and so we actually reused our capes from that. And then Ethan talked to Mark, the guy from MMCB Capes. And if for your audience members, if they don't know who that is, they basically produce these Lego kind of cloth based. So they're like decals, but they're on cloth. And he does like military uniforms. So they're pretty neat. But so he just ordered a huge amount from them. He got like hooked them up really nice with some German ones too, in addition to the Americans.
All right, I got you.
Now, what was it? what was it like kind of putting this whole thing together when you all showed up to the convention with your pieces?
Oh
Did it
yeah,
go
that's
together
definitely
smoothly,
like
or-
the challenge. So that's like honestly where the real challenge begins, because even if you like plan everything perfectly, like things are going to go wrong. And building, like putting together this massive display at the con is like a whole nother challenge. Like I was there till 2 a.m. every night on the private days to kind of get everything done. And I kind of took the role, as Ethan did a lot of the online kind of planning, but at the convention itself, I pretty much kind of took the lead and kind of like was sort of ordering people around, because if I wasn't doing that, honestly, like there's a good chance the collab might have not gotten finished in time, because despite our best planning, there was a couple like base plates and houses that people forgot to do or didn't have time to do. I'm, for example, kind of guilty of this. I didn't have time to do one of my houses, so I had to actually build one at the convention. But that kind of brings me to my next point too, where it's like you got to use the convention and your surroundings well. For example, at Brick Fair, there's lots of bulk parts, so we were actually able to pretty easily build a nice house. I don't know if you have the picture of it, but if you're looking through Bastogne pictures, there's a dark gray 2-story house with 2 like roof windows. I have a picture on my stream, but like, so that house was actually built by me on site, which I was pretty happy with how it turned out considering that. But just in general too. Oh, another thing, like the way we hung the airplane on, we just went to Lowe's, which was like a couple blocks away, and then bought like iron tubing to kind of get the scaffolding. That's the house. So yeah, that house was actually built on site, which was pretty cool. Another thing that helped out too was one of our members, Hunter. I don't remember what his flicker is nowadays, but Hunter Erickson.
It's Koskai.
Something like that.
Something really
So
weird.
yeah, he brought a big bin of just dark gray parts in general. Like people brought big bulk bins of parts, even in addition to what was already available at the convention. So if you're doing any collab, bulk parts are your best friend, because it's just so nice to even if you have everything perfectly planned out and people like bring everything, when you're at the convention, you could be like, oh, it'd be really cool if we like improve this rock work, or if we put another house here, and bulk parts really just gives you that flexibility, which was a big help.
So
this
yeah,
go ahead, Danny. Go. Oh, okay, I'll go ahead. These guys that I talked to, I was at Bricks by the Bay. There were a few big collaborations that some lugs put on, and I was curious what they did about stuff that wasn't brought on time, or if people flaked, which we talked about a while ago, but it's kind of relevant to this, where they just have like these basic plates of stuff that they bring that can just be put in wherever there's empty space, so it just doesn't look necessarily empty. And I think that would definitely be the way to do it. And then if you have extra time, you bring out those bulk parts and you build something on it. But
yeah,
preparing for the worst, I suppose, assuming that people are going to flake, maybe you could mark down the slightly sketchy people that you think might not finish on time or something, and just prepare for the worst. But
I think a lot of it too also just depends on what collab you're doing, because for this collab, here's an example. It was actually meant to be bigger. I know it's hard to believe because it's huge, but there was probably like 3 sections cut off at the end of the forest part, which was just snow. So that was very easy to cut off because it didn't really affect the build. But if we were missing like large town parts, that's much harder to kind of like compensate. So depending on what type of collab you're doing, if you're just doing a big landscaping like battle scene, like you could probably pretty easily like make it smaller and conciser, and no one would know the difference, or like know you had to cut stuff. But if you have a town and you're just missing a big section with no houses and a little bit janky, it's a lot more noticeable.
Now, you mentioned all the difficulties with putting it together. Was there any problems taking it apart, figuring out which pieces belong to who, or did that go pretty simply?
Yeah, so that's also definitely a big challenge. I mean, for one, as you said, like you basically just grind nonstop to try and get this thing done in like 3 days, and then it's like all your hard work, and then it's like, all right, time to pack up, and you just got to break everything apart, which is very sad. But as far as like, it's going to happen. I've had experiences in past collabs where I've actually like taken home tanks that weren't mine on accident because when my dad was helping pack up and he just grabbed them assuming they were mine. So, but usually what we did this year is the last guy to leave, depending on who it was, kind of just takes pictures of things that weren't his, kind of just communicate in our Skype group like, yo, whose is this? And we just try to do our best to kind of get everyone their stuff back.
Right. That seems, I've seen some pictures of that. Is it, so if you're buying bulk parts on scene, and how do you get that home? Like, let's say you help build someone else's section. Do you just...
Yeah, so, I mean, I think bulk parts, like, people are less attached to in general, unless they're, like, valuable parts. I think, really quick, just to touch on it, like, the thing people really want to get back and don't want to lose are usually figures are pretty valuable. And I mean, obviously, like, tanks and stuff, but I know I said earlier, my dad accidentally took some ones, but usually that's like a rare occurrence. Like, usually you have a pretty good idea of what's yours. I would say the things that are pretty common are to take home on accident are figures, because you do your best. Usually what we try to do is have everyone brings figures, but we try to put everyone's own figures on like one plate or like in a area so they kind of know what's theirs, because they all look the same. So unless you're looking really closely, it's kind of hard to differentiate whose are whose. So that's kind of a strategy in general, is, like I said, I know I'm kind of repeating myself, but just put the figures on. If you have like 10 figures, put them all close to each other. So that kind of helps limit that problem.
Gotcha. We had a bit of that issue at Scarif. I think Chris took home one of my figures, and I took a bunch of his stuff. So
some people in our group are, I get it if you're taking home a bunch of stuff, but I'm not particularly like stingy about people taking parts. I just take what looks like about what was mine. And it's like, if I lose some parts, hopefully the collab turned out good. But speaking of Scarif.
So comparing Scarif to Bastogne and St. Mir is a fun thing. And so basically Scarif, we had, what you guys had is what we lacked is a strong leader for our collab, if that makes any sense, like on the site to organize things. It was mostly just like people standing around at while the collab didn't get done, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it wasn't that we had a leader that did a bad job. It's almost like we didn't really ever kind of figure out, all right, we need someone to like
build this section.
Yeah, and divide up. Like we kind of thought of like, okay, here's the parts we want, but we never sat down with everyone's like, okay, someone's in charge, we do checkups, and we're going to divide these sections up. You take this, you take that, sort of thing. Never happened.
And also, like, we had some pretty just like obviously dumb things. Like, there were certain sections that just were not figured out before the convention happened. Like, the thing that comes to mind is the rail system, which I kind of have a picture of here, that just isn't complete at all. It's like, well, we'll figure it out then. And it's like, we know we won't, but it's easier to put it off to later.
I mean, I think it's really just a balance. So the more planning you do before the convention usually translates to less work at the convention. So it's just finding that right balance. I know, for example, like ThugLUG's display, like they actually got theirs up pretty quick. And I know you were kind of saying earlier, they actually kind of met before Brick Fair and sort of put it together and then brought it, which if you actually are able to do that, it's probably a really good idea. But, we really didn't have that luxury, so we had to put everything together on site. So, and I think partially too, because Bastogne was so huge, like most collabs you're going to do are not going to be that big in general. It just took way more work to kind of get everything done than most collabs probably would in general.
Right, and I think ThugLUG actually, from a video I saw on one of their streams, it looked like they were meeting together during the year building, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's another great advantage. If you're doing a collab with people you can actually meet in person outside of the Brick Fair, like that's a huge plus, because it's way easier to kind of build with someone else and kind of just bounce ideas off instead of just building alone.
Right. So it's all about just getting organization and being able to assemble all your sections on site. Like we had I think our thing was we were just generally lazy, and we didn't really start hard building for Scarif until the night before Public started coming on. And even then, it was.
I think
that
one
hard.
difference was like how rigid was your organization? How rigid was your map? Like because we kind of had a map, but not really of what we were doing. Because really, the only collaborative part was the beach island area, which was actually a huge area that had to be filled up and had to conform to other stuff. But we more treated it like, oh yeah, just kind of bring some freeform islands, and we'll sort of just put them down and see what happens. And we ended up with like just a bunch of sort of rectangular ones. And well, not really a bunch. We didn't have enough, and it just didn't have like a cohesive shape, and it was just an awkward situation. So, like, how do you know how detailed the map was of Mastone?
Yeah, so the map actually was not that detailed. It was basically just, I think Ethan just drew it up on MS Paint, and it was basically just a grid section, right, with like A, B, C, D, E, whatever, yada yada, like on the left, and then 1, 2, 3, you know, kind of like a battleship. That would be an analogy, like the board game. And so, and then he drew out. Okay, so that's the one thing for any collab. You definitely like want kind of like, as I was saying earlier, at least one person really kind of running it online, and then one person. Can be the person at the convention, but you want someone definitely kind of like being the like top guy and kind of like making sure everyone's working on it and, you know, stuff like that. But anyway, back to your question, it basically was just a grid with kind of stuff drawn on it, like what we wanted in each grid. And that's how usually, in my experience, most collabs are done. I'm sure there's probably exceptions. I know, for example, a lot of the collabs at BrickCon are kind of just like how you were saying, where it's like there's a rough idea, but it's really kind of like loosey-goosey. Like everyone just brings stuff and you kind of figure it out. But what I would say from my own experience, generally, the more planning you do, the better it usually turns out. And another thing I would say too is it's better to have a small collab that looks really nice than a big collab that is less detailed. And I think Bastogne is actually rare because it's huge, but we still kept a very good level of detail throughout the collab, in my own opinion. And I think it turned out really nice. But if you're like only have 4 builders, like don't try and do like a 20-foot collab. Just do something nice and small. Like you could just do basically like 6 base plates or something like that, but just make it look really good. And that's the most important thing.
One thing I want to mention real quick is I don't want to scare off any of our younger viewers from maybe considering going to a convention for the first time, or have some friends that want to put together a collab for their first time. Don't be scared by all this like intense planning and stuff we're talking about. If you're thinking about doing a collab, just go for it and do your best, because that's kind of what we've done the past 2 years. And we've learned from our mistakes. In fact, the first thing we did was right when we got back from Brickworld this year, we had a meeting. And we basically went, okay, what was everything that went wrong with our collab this year, and how can we fix that for next year? So it's always important to get experience so you can learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, for sure. Like I've been doing collabs pretty much almost exclusively, honestly. Like basically, I don't really do that many solo builds. A lot of the time, I'm just building for these collabs. And you know, you could look back on my stream and look at some of the earlier collabs I took part of, and they're not that good. But every time you kind of take it and you take the experience and you kind of work towards the next year, as you were saying. And I think in general too, as time progresses, you're generally going to become a better builder, and that will just translate into better collabs as well, and just better builds in general.
Right. So we're going to be going on to our 3rd major Brickworld collab this next year. And actually, I what you said about building smaller but better is, I think, what we might have to focus on is just with the lack of builders this year.
Do you have any suggestions for like dealing with diversity in a collab, like the look of the build, so everything doesn't look like the same, I guess, is just a simple way to put it.
Yeah, so I think that all comes down to layout planning. A good example of something that kind of went wrong was actually a display I worked on in Brick Fair 2014 was the Battle of Crete. And it turned out good, don't get me wrong, but I think in hindsight, we probably should have planned it out a little bit better because it was very kind of boring. It was basically laid out into kind of 3 parts. There was like a dark tan airstrip, a tan hillside, and then just a big field of grass. And in real life, there was a big field of grass, but that didn't translate as well as I probably thought it would have in Lego form. And so what ended up happening was it's just we had this big section of just flat grass, and it with not that much stuff in it, and it didn't really like look that detailed. It didn't really have that much layering, and it really probably just could have turned out better. And so kind of bringing that back to what you were saying was it's really important when you're making that layout to kind of think like, is this going to translate well into Lego? And if it's not going to, what can we do to make it look good? And I think where you got to find that balance of accuracy versus this looks good in Lego, because even though that might have been accurate, it might have just really been a flat grassy area. It didn't really look that visually interesting.
Right. So what would you do like for Bastogne? I noticed that like it just ended up being like strips of buildings, and so is like having a big center point like a big part of a collab, or is it possible to do something like Bastogne where it's just strips of buildings so make it look interesting?
It really just depends. So like example, St. Mare, the collab I worked on for Brick Fair 2016, like it had this huge church that Toby and I built. He built like half of it at home, and then I worked with him to finish it at the convention. And that was definitely the center point, and it was like a real like eye grabber. But then at Bastogne, as you were saying, like there's really nothing that stands out too much. It's just everything is kind of just good. I get like everything turned out great, but like there's no like big focus. I see what you're saying. So, but I think both collabs turned out well in their own respects. So I think you can do either. I mean, another example would be like Thuglug's display. I know they had the fort, but like a lot of their displays, there's no like big center point, but they all turn out really well. But then you also look at collabs like the Homefront ones, which I'm sure you'll pull up pictures to show your audience, but like they have the JJ brothers they're on Flickr as well. They like will build these insane things, and they're definitely the focal points of these collabs. So I think you can really do either. It just depends on what build you're doing and what you want to do.
Right. It's like basically what I'm really getting at is just like let's say we do something like a Star Wars city, right, where a lot of the buildings look the same. Like how would you get around basically making it like, let's say the center point's really hard to build, so how would you get around it's like the center point's nearly impossible to build, so how would you get around just keeping away from like the plain detailist buildings, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I mean I'm not too experienced in building Star Wars, but like you can take the same principles that we did with Bastogne, because it's a town, right? And you know the architecture is all very similar, but what you can do is really just like you just make it look really detailed. So you know in Bastogne we tried to use different colors to build houses, and you could probably apply that to Star Wars too, or even if it's like the same color for the buildings, like you know, you could just make it look, the buildings all look really nice and just have a certain kind of look to it, so everything looks good. And then, or just have different type of architecture, like the same style, but you could maybe have taller buildings, or you could have like a restaurant, or you could have a store, or just variety. I think that's the most important thing, is you want to have everything feel the same, but also different at the same time, which I know that sounds kind of confusing, but you want everything generally to like the same, but within that genre, that thing you're doing, you want every building to kind of be distinct and unique, but still look and feel similar. I know that's kind of confusing. Hopefully that makes sense.
I get it. All right.
Yeah, I feel that that's a good point to wrap up on. I just want to let everyone watching know, thank you so much for watching, and let us know what you think of this. If there's some topics you'd like us to cover in the future, some guests you'd like us to have on the show in the future, please let us know some feedback on this.
Yeah, and definitely too, if you guys have any other questions about like running collabs, I don't want to like I'm bragging, but I do have a lot of experience. So I'll definitely like leave some comments if you have any more questions, and I'll try and do my best to answer them. I'll hop on the comment section.
I want to leave.
Anyway, I think that brings us just about to a close for this podcast. Again, leave feedback down below. We might need a lot of help. But I want to thank our guest, Elliot, so much for joining us here on our first podcast. It was kind of an organizational disaster leading up to it, but we're learning, and he dealt with us. So big thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, and I'd love to come back any other time.
And yeah, so if you learned some good information, leave a comment down below, and we'll see you guys in the next episode at some undisclosed time.